Today we'll be discussing gaming as it relates to the well-being of society. Hello and welcome to Deep in the D-Pad, where we explore all things video games through an intellectual lens. I'm your friendly neighborhood game dev, Carlos, and with me is my friend, writer, and co-host, RK Taylor. So, Ryan, for our D-Pad Delight section, where at the start of each episode we share a story that relates to gaming in some way that influenced us in our history, what is the delight you'd like to bring to our picnic today?
I'm thinking specifically about how video games have helped during quarantine, and Ring Fit Adventure. I'm sure many people listening to this will have heard of Ring Fit if they've not played it themselves, but it is a game for the Switch where you have like a Pilates ring. Have you played it, Los?
I have not played it. It's a much sought-after title in my friend group. A lot of people are talking about it. The people who do have it speak very highly of it, and this Pilates ring that they grow fond of through the character in the game.
The Pilates ring is so intense, like it really, the resistance in it is very impressive to me. But so through the game, you have a Joy-Con strapped to your thigh, you have a Joy-Con in the actual Pilates ring, and you run in order to like move through the track of the game, and to defeat, it's a turn-based fighting type of combat, but the way that you navigate is through exercise. So you fight and you travel all through moving your body, and pushing or pulling the Pilates ring, and it's great. And also, my girlfriend, who really does not know much about video games, has learned about some basic RPG mechanics, like that instead of potions they have smoothies, and she's learned about like attack power and those kinds of things, like changing her clothes. And it's just been a great, I think about my mom using like Walk Away the Pounds VHS tapes when I was a kid, and to have this level of integration and like, I think there's a lot of stimuli that can kind of keep you, it's directly interacting with you, so that kind of reinforces the positive experience and the feedback that you're getting. It's not just kind of like almost like a passive like the host is walking, so I have to walk, and I think it's just really great for health, and I'm really happy that it exists.
That's awesome. It sounds what you described with the tape and the passive kind of play sounds a lot like one of our favorite games, Dance Central. Like, we enjoy it so much, but it is really like, it is that same VHS type thing. Like, someone is doing something on the screen, they're going to do it regardless of how well we're doing it on, on Connect. But yeah, I mean, it's great that we are at a point where our peripherals can like be that much better, and we have minds that are creative enough to, really build character through these things and also enforce like some sort of physical benefit to the play of their game. So on the topic of, physical benefits to games you're playing, I'll talk about a time I saw a very, very sweaty teen who inspired me to play Dance Dance Revolution.
Oh gosh.
So when I was young, I was like in middle school, I think. I remember being at a summer camp. So probably like early teens or whatever, maybe a little younger. We had a trip that went to this arcade ski resort place. I don't quite remember any of it. Oh, I think it was called like Holiday Mountain or something. But I remember there was a rock wall, there was a rock wall, a ski slope, and then an arcade and like bumper car somewhere. First time I walk into this arcade.
And go-karts. They have go-karts there, man.
They have go-karts? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Damn. So I walk into this arcade. I love arcades. I love video games at this point in time already. So I walk in, the intoxicating audio wave of just bells, whistles, dings, dongs, and clanks are happening, and I hear just this beat, this infectious dance beat, and I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, I'm not used to hearing like such good tunes. And I think it was probably Butterfly. It was honestly probably like, I is my little butterfly, like that song. It was that one, or Captain Jack. And I look to my side and I see just this like probably like some 17-year-old, like 250-pound dude, just full gallon of water. Not full, actually. It was about 3/4 depleted because he'd been sweating and drinking it through the entire time, and he is just slamming on the pads, and with each slam, like, beads of sweat are just coming off his hair, and like he's got two hands on the back thing, and for some reason my like little baby brain was like, that's so cool, I want to dance.
Is this the first time you ever saw DDR?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah.
Oh man. When you have people who put their hands on the back, you know they're serious. Those rails, I didn't know what they were for the first few times that I like saw DDR in an arcade, and then you just see those videos of people who are like playing on the hardest difficulty, not missing a beat,
Yep.
Crazy.
And they're practically just holding themselves on the back bar, right? Like they're like the gravity, the weight of their body is like impairing them. So they must hold themselves up to let their feet travel even faster.
It's like needing a strap to play Guitar Hero.
Oh my god. What do you mean you always need a strap to play Guitar Hero. You're supposed to play it standing. You got to do the power strut. What are you talking about?
What?
Have you never used the strap?
I don't think I've ever used the strap. I don't know. I probably have, but because I felt like obligated to,
What? How do you? Oh man, okay. Hang on. We need to go down a little. We need to go a little deeper into this D-pad for a moment. How do you play Guitar Hero? How do you hold the guitar, Ryan?
I definitely play sitting with it on my lap, and like,
oh my god,
also on medium because I'm not trying to get that orange key. Like, I really want to retry Guitar Hero now that I have like.
You play it. You go like John Mayer style. Like, what the hell, man? Come on.
Yeah, I get a stool.
It's good. Oh wow. I'm like, oh listeners, you can't see me, but my head is in my hand. Like, can't believe that. It's not a bad thing, but like, it's Guitar Hero. You're supposed to be a rock legend, and you sat the whole time through. I know you've played multiple Guitar Heroes. I'm so shocked, Ryan. You gotta embody the experience more, man.
What, do you play drums standing too? Like, come on.
Why would I? Why drummers sit? Why would I stand to play drums? Don't make no sense.
Okay, so you're really just trying to replicate your favorite musicians. Okay.
Yeah.
What about DJ Hero? Did you sit playing DJ Hero, or did you stand for that too?
I stood.
No, you didn't. Are you serious?
I set up a little, I had a little foldy dinner table that I was able to like use for the stand.
You're like 6'2". There's just not ergonomically possible.
Well, I mean, I was like a little shorter back then.
No, you weren't. I know your height from DJ Hero days.
I mean, I made it work. Anyway, it makes sense that I'm in, the VR field, given how much I tried to immerse myself in games that weren't completely engrossing me. Yeah, DDR, that was like my first experience, just seeing this big sweaty guy go like full hog on the machine, both hands on the back bar. And
yeah, that guy lost some weight too.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of like the first thing not the first thing I thought of. Definitely the first thing I thought of was like the tunes and the game and the I would say something that I've been thinking of recently is like relatability of kinesis, body movement within sports, and I was able to recognize the kinesis and the expertise being shown off as this guy played the game. Which is something not a lot of video games can do, which I think really helped to me as a kid, being like, wow, that actually looks like something I could perform, and also it looks like something that would lead to me like losing weight if I was performing it as well as him, which kind of got me into not getting DDR, but going to that arcade more, playing DDR, actually like sweating it out and like getting better at the game, and eventually like getting a copy for home, which I think rolled into my love for Dance Central, which rolled into my love for other things of that nature.
Yeah, I would like to have like an extended conversation about like rhythm games in general. I don't really know at this point what exactly we can say about them, but I'd be interested in your, I guess, understanding of like different input mechanisms. And, like if you look at like the modern controllers, they look almost identical, and they've shifted a lot, and they've kind of all converged on this like one model, but obviously that's different with VR and different kinds of like augmented reality stuff. And rhythm games, like we were talking about, like Guitar Hero, Rock Band, DJ Hero, like rhythm games really seem like they have the opportunity to grant us a different kind of relationship with controllers and like how our body is used as an input system. And I'm sure you have really sophisticated things to say about that I just have never comprehended.
Yeah, there's like well, I don't say yeah to kind of toot my own horn at saying sophisticated things. I just ramble. And but yeah, I mean, there definitely that's something we should touch on in a later episode. Maybe there's a lot of stuff we can look at when you talk about the controller itself like gets my mind racing with thoughts.
Dude,
like,
I just want to talk about so much stuff.
yeah, right, like
it's killing me.
honestly, like the history and evolution of controllers, including VR, because like right now I really like the idea that at least that Oculus kind of like pushed forth with their controllers, where it was like, hey, let's see how we could somehow split the traditional Xbox or PS4 controller. Like, how do we split them in half? And I guess like the Switch also did this, right? But I somewhat argue that the Oculus did it better in an individualistic sense, because the Switch had to make up for the fact that like, oh, we want multiple people to play, so let's make the controllers like kind of tiny, or not let's make them tiny, but let's make these tiny controllers support being an individual controller, whereas you can't do that.
Yeah, it's like a reversible jacket or something,
Exactly.
It's like trying to serve two functions at the same time.
Yeah.
And now let's get deeper into the D-pad. We're going to discuss the potential that video games have to benefit society. So, Los, you were telling me about like surgeon simulators. Can you... I don't really know anything about that, honestly. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so for a while, gaming has been used with medical care professionals to try to help train them. This has been like in the past decade, say like the Wii motion controllers might have been used in like some sort of like surgical operation. You might think what's that game, Trauma Center, something akin to that, but more serious, more actual like diagrams and stuff. But as we see the rise of VR, we see a lot of training for medical fields and even the military coming from VR. Obviously within our U.S. society, the military gets everything first, and they get the moderate to best version at the time of it. So a lot of training would happen in VR, like for pilots. A conversation I was having with someone this week, they were telling me about the training scenarios they would have to set up for pilots, not the flying scenarios, but the simple like, what do I do when I get into the pod? Like, what's the very first thing I should look at? What's the dongle I should pull? Where do I put this like face mask and all that? And specifically how the developer had to take these like 700-page manuals, read them front and back, and then have a full-length conversation with the training foreman on the site to understand the language that these military officials were speaking and what information they were trying to convey. And then from their game, well, I say game loosely here, but from their user experience background, they try to condense that into a enjoyable interactive experience that you can actually learn from. After playing it a few times, you can get into that realistic cockpit and do everything that you had trained for, and it makes you that much more ready for the day where you need to fly.
Yeah, it reminds me of Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Yeah, I would say like similar idea, just way more in depth and probably like just isolated, right? So like flight sim would allow you to like fly all over the world and stuff, whereas these training games would be very simple, not simple, but very much just like, oh hey, you're playing the cockpit game today. It's only in the cockpit, it never moves anywhere else.
Right. So some of the benefits of this, like I think the most obvious one that comes to my mind is that like obviously flying a plane is really risky if you have never flown a plane before. So it's kind of a way to get your feet wet and to like learn about it before you are actually responsible for lives, including your own.
Right. Yes. Yes, for sure. And that type of training could also be extended to, commercial airline pilots. Because if you're gonna have, tons of passengers, you want to make sure that they have the training to go with it. VR just helps all that much more because you can be in the actual scenario. Um, Also on the training front, or not so much on the training front, but still on the VR and like beneficial front, and military, is that VR has been used with a military partnership to help therapy for vets with PTSD. One story I remember from, I believe it was a conference I went to, Montreal International Games Summit, I think was the one. Someone had spoken about how they were in a IED incident. They were driving. They were in the passenger seat of their Jeep. Their commander drove near an IED. It blew up. The car flipped over, and they've suffered severe trauma from it. So within VR, they recreated that experience, like that moment-to-moment experience of like the drive leading up to the explosion, leading up to like the short aftermath, and like found ways to layer in, like they found out what were okay. So sorry, to take a step back and give the listener like a full kind of view of like what the flow of this took to make this feat happen. It was a collaboration between like therapists and like developer, and figuring out what's our patient's triggers, and how can we take those things and turn them into these toggleable layers that we can just turn on and off in his experience. And from there, like slowly funnel in everything. So like I think at first it was just driving the Jeep and being in the Jeep. All they could do was sit in the passenger seat and go in a straight line as the Jeep went, but it never got to the city at first where he suffered the attack. And so step 2 was like, next session we bring in, now he goes to the city, and then next session was like, now the sound of the explosion happens, no visual, nothing like that, the car doesn't move, just the sound happens, and layering until eventually he was I don't know if cured is the right word, but his issues were way more reduced than they were before. It was a very touching story.
Yeah, so that reminds me of a couple of therapeutic techniques. One is called systematic desensitization, which is very similar to I think what you're talking about is kind of VR aiding a systematic desensitization process. Essentially, the systematic desensitization is when a person has a phobia, is most often when it's used. There are a lot of the more theoretical psychodynamic types of approaches are basically completely useless. Like talking to someone about how their parents made them emo is not going to be helpful if someone has arachnophobia, for example, right? So the most like efficacious therapy that we have is this kind of desensitization, where people are gradually exposed to more intense versions of the stimuli that they're afraid of. So let's say, again, arachnophobia, right? There are two main ways, right? One is like just covering, like fear factor, just like cover yourself with spiders, right? And then eventually your body can only stay in fight or flight for so long, right? So eventually your body realizes that there's no threat, and then you become like, that deep, intense immersion is going to free you of the fear eventually, right? The other way is the systematic desensitization, which is what you're talking about, which is you get gradually closer and closer to an encounter with the thing that you're most afraid of. So that could be like, today I'm going to draw a spider, and the person has to be voluntarily experiencing this, right? So you can't just force this upon someone. They have to really take this on with like the responsibility that they're trying to overcome this and all of that, right? So today it might be I look at a picture of a spider. Tomorrow it might be I draw a picture of a spider. Then it might be that I'm in the same room as a spider, but I'm in the corner and it's in the opposite corner and it's in a cage. Then, and eventually it could be like, then I'm going to touch a spider, then I'm going to touch multiple spiders, etc. Right? So that's what you're saying with this like layering, but you can get so immersive when you're actually in a headset, and like the idea of recreating is the exact space and the mood, and you're incorporating all of the memories. The other thing it reminds me of is EMDR, which is a type of therapy. It stands for eye movement EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Do you know about EMDR, Los?
No, I legit thought you were talking about a Call of Duty sniper rifle for a moment.
Lord. So EMDR is like a type of therapy where sometimes there are like programs that people use where there's like a ball moving back and forth. Other times they will, you can just follow someone's finger and as it moves from left to right. And what it's doing is kind of, while you're in a wakeful state, you are kind of simulating REM, rapid eye movement, which is what happens when you're in like a deep phase of sleep. That's also like when you're dreaming, you're engaging in REM sleep. So the idea is like people with I think it was discovered because it was like one of those like science things that was like accidentally discovered. But the person who discovered it, gosh, I wish I remembered all the details, but it was something like they were trying to investigate why people with trauma have issues with sleep. And I think this idea of like trying to recreate rapid eye movement came to them. Anyway, regardless of the origin story of REM or of EMDR, she realized that people can desensitize themselves from their traumatic memories by reliving them and following their associative chain. So let's say you were in a car accident, right? And I'm like, we're going to focus on that, right? And then you're going to watch this ball that goes left and right. And then I'm going to ask you the first thing that comes to your mind. And then you're going to tell me, and then you're going to think about that and focus on that while you're watching this ball. And then I'm going to ask you the next thing that comes. And then basically what it's doing is it's following a chain of your thoughts from the base trauma narrative. And we're kind of painting a picture of what all the things that are all connected to that original source of trauma. And you do that until you start to feel better, and basically what's happening is your brain is reprocessing the initial event, and you're learning that in this present moment you're safe and that things are okay. And even though you were triggered and like feeling like really intense emotions at the time, those are no longer applicable or relevant to your current situation, right? So, which is exactly what's happening with veterans who are experiencing this in VR, right? So they when they were in war, that was a very dangerous situation that they were in, and it made sense for them to feel all of these kinds of intense feelings. But now that they're back home and they're not on a battlefield, they basically have to unlearn all of those painful feelings that they had. And the way that they can do that is by immersing themselves in an artificial environment that recreates that, so that they no longer have the same emotional intensity that they once had. And they're kind of learning that it's possible to think about these things and have these flashbacks, but also still be safe and still like recognize that you're okay. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And listeners, if you need any deeper insight or explanation into some of this stuff, feel free to reach out to us via
askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com.
So, speaking of fully immersing yourself in virtual environments, flashbacks, and education, let's talk a little bit about Assassin's Creed. So Assassin's Creed has been used in classrooms to, specifically history classrooms most of the time, to show off landmarks or historical context for lessons. I've seen this in like high schools as well as colleges, where either like the architecture of certain places will be studied via the game, because that's the only way you can like get up close to some of this architecture. Even if you were to go to the site yourself in real life, you wouldn't be able to climb up to like this very specific spot of the place. And because these multi-million dollar companies give enough money to their artists, they can go in and use satellite imaging to actually create a realistic or an actual like a real full replication of these historical sites, and that allows educators to just all the more like reference these games. But Ryan, I think you also had a good note on education with video games regarding Scribblenauts, right? That game where you type things and bring them to life.
Yes. Before we get into that, can I jump on the Assassin's Creed bandwagon?
Oh yeah, of course.
There are two things that I recently heard about Assassin's Creed. One of them was a Reddit post, so we'll just say that this is apocryphal because I really don't know the veracity of it. But there was like a story where some guy got he was in Italy, I think, and his tour guide got lost, and they were going on their way to some cathedral or something, and the student, they were on a school trip. And you're smiling, do you know the story?
No, I just know where it's going. I haven't heard it, but I know where it's going.
The tour guide got lost, and then the kid was like, oh, I know the way, and then he'd never been to Italy, and the teacher was like, he got there successfully, and the teacher was like, how the hell did you know like where to go? And the guy was like, I play a lot of Assassin's Creed. And just the idea that like whether or not the fact that could be true,
right?
I don't care really whether or not it is true. It doesn't matter to me, but because it's believable. And that's so interesting that video games are able to simulate a city well enough where it's plausible that someone could actually direct. Someone could study the map of the city. And, going back to Microsoft Flight Simulator, the idea that I could tour, I was thinking about, like, I have no interest in playing that game personally, but if I were going to play, it wouldn't be for the pilot mechanic part of it. It would be the fact that I can't travel anywhere during COVID. And I would love to see what Japan looks like, I would love to fly somewhere and really like just explore what things look like from above and like, see the airport and all of those kinds of things. There's more of like a cultural like setting kind of approach that I would like to take in these realistic environments. And yeah, I think Assassin's Creed is clearly allowing some people to be able to connect with environments.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, I got kind of like two things to riff off that. I remember playing Spider-Man 2, the movie game, on GameCube, and that was, compared to today's Spider-Man, like that game's recreation of New York was like okay. It had landmarks and stuff, but I don't know if you could necessarily like, figure your way around it. But I remember playing that game, and then literally like that same month or later that year, I went with my family to, again, this was when I was young. So like my family took me to some restaurant in the city, and I was like literally like leaning my head out the window while we were slowly moving through traffic and like pointing out any and every building I recognized that I actually like swung off of or like climbed. And I was like, there's no way that this brown building with black windows, that's square, it's gotta be the same one. I think like, as the games move on and like, especially now, like I said, comparing Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Man Miles Morales to like what Spider-Man games were back then, I think it's way, way more believable now, especially with the satellite imaging also, that like people can just find their way around. And
yeah, dude, I did the same thing except with New Donk City. The other thing that I said that I was going to say about Assassin's Creed, and again, this is another story where I heard it and I'm not sure if it's true, but I think you may have data on this in that noggin of yours. Someone said that a building burned down somewhere, and they were like the Assassin's Creed rendering was so good that was the schematic that they used for the building.
I also heard that story. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't look into it because I didn't know they didn't say what building it was. So this is like tertiary, like not secondhand, but like third-hand information. It's like fucking watered down post-truth. Don't listen to me. I'm a schmuck.
I think that story does hold some weight. I don't remember the building. I do remember having a conversation specifically about this subject, and I remember it because I kept screwing up the name of the building. So I'm not going to tell you what the building is, listener, because you're probably going to find the wrong one. But yeah, Assassin's Creed had already earlier in time like remade this building, or I should say one or several artists over at Ubisoft like made this building, and once it received damage, the architects were able, the repairmen or whatever, were able to look at the game and see what grooves went where and all that. And that's like really cool. Hopefully we don't have to use that too often, but it's like it's very nice to see that that's like a possibility.
Yeah, it's like a tool. It's a tool that we didn't even realize that we created. I mean, it's using, like, you're talking about the surgeon simulators and stuff like that earlier, and that's a program that's intentionally created with the goal of educating and training. But the idea that like it's almost like a side effect is like of Assassin's Creed is that we have these great architectural models that like nobody was like, we need to create Assassin's Creed in order to have mock-ups of buildings. Like we need to have a like backup.
You're talking about like keeping history in a sense, right? Like it's some sort of like for posterity, here's a 3D model of this very specific building.
It's record keeping.
Yeah. That's I never really thought about it that way, because when you started talking about record keeping, archival, I started thinking about how like archival isn't really a like emphasized thing amongst games. So I was thinking like, what would have happened if that place burned down like 2 generations ahead than when it did, when that Assassin's Creed game might have been on a console that like didn't get a remaster or whatever. So now it's almost like looking for your dad's Super Nintendo to see if we could get a repair schematic for this thing, right? So yeah, that's a whole nother bag of worms, and we'll save that for another day. But yeah, that's something to think on. If games are helping us to archive human history and maybe help us repair it in some way, what can we do to help make sure we archive our archival tools, our helpful archival reference?
Word. Going back to the Scribblenauts thing, I found this dissertation that was let me get the author's name. Norris Durrell Parker. The title of the dissertation, and I'll link it, is Utilizing Scribblenauts to Increase Reading Comprehension and Improve Literacy Skills of Third Grade Students. Let me be totally honest, this is like over 250 pages, so I skimmed and like bounced around to different sections to try to figure out, the most important ideas and whatnot. There were only 32 students, which is an incredibly, incredibly small study, right? Like you would want hundreds or thousands of students to be studied in order for this to really have some
large scale tracking.
Yes, and what could happen is that this could be replicated. Someone could see this dissertation, or this dude could get could apply for grants to get funding in order to really try to bring this to like a bigger level. But anyway, so there were only 32 students, and they were in 3rd grade, and half of them received like ordinary like literacy training, and the other half received Scribblenauts. And then after several weeks, they switched. So anyway, so they looked to see if people using Scribblenauts would learn at a faster rate than people who were learning through the like ordinary typical methods that teachers were using to teach literacy. And the 3 research questions that they looked at were to see if their reading comprehension and vocabulary would improve. It was reading comprehension and literacy was one, vocabulary was the second, and the third one was something about like creativity and flow states and those kinds of things. And essentially the researcher found that although Scribblenauts did improve vocabulary and it did improve reading comprehension and literacy, it did not improve them at a rate that was statistically significant compared to the typical teaching tools. So it wasn't like, which is really like not the best finding for someone who's like really hopeful for the power of like Scribblenauts to be, but Scribblenauts also isn't like meant to be an educational game. It's supposed to be a fun game. So it's just kind of using something that's already, in existence. And if we could use, if we could create a video game that was like completely designed, like I began reading with like Jumpstart. I don't know if you ever like if you remember that, or like Reading Rabbit, I think was another one.
Yeah, Reader Rabbit was the one I was about to cite. Reader Rabbit and what is it, Math Blaster, the one where you went to space or whatever.
I don't know that one, but anyway. So, but what the researcher did find for this was that there was greater creativity in student word choice, and there was more teamwork, and like collecting the star rights was like a motivator that was external to the reading goal, and that created this kind of like flow state in the children that was different than the experience that students would get reading a book, as 8-year-olds. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because when for now, let's just say a person is a user. When a user approaches a book, their main objective is like consuming the words of the book, internalizing the message, and their main obstacle is the book. Like if we were to compare a book to, say, Death Stranding, right? Like each word is, or each letter is a little rock on the grassy field that is this book for you to walk across in Death Stranding. And what makes those rocks less jagged and protrude less from the ground is that wrapper of the Starites, and like the puzzle that comes with, or rather the puzzle that the reading is wrapped around, right? You're making the user forget the pain of one thing because you're presenting it in like such a fun way that they want to engage, so they'll either try to engage and get the context as they go, or they'll actively learn how to like better communicate with this thing, which would be through learning how to read, right?
Yeah, I mean, what is the goal of reading a book? Like as someone who reads literary fiction as an adult, like I don't really read for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't read for escapism. I'm reading to learn about social issues, or to like expand my understanding of human relationships and those kinds of things. And I don't really think I didn't have the capacity for that at all when I was 8 years old. So I don't know, like as a child, I wasn't like super drawn to reading, because it didn't have I was more interested in having good conversations, but I didn't have the vocabulary, the ability to read things that I think were like intellectually engaging for me, because I didn't really have the capacity to be like an intellectual at that age. But when you're a kid, so really, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you're a kid, it's more about learning to recognize words and how to put them together, and, like what you enjoy, right? And you're kind of like building the ground for the ability to have a rich engagement with texts later on. And if you're just trying to build vocabulary, being a kid who has a goal in a video game is a way, like, I remember trying to read Pokemon Red and Blue, like as a kid, and like have my parents read it to me. And one of my biggest motivations for wanting to learn to read when I was like 5 or 6 was so that I didn't need my parents to read this game to me, because they would get so annoyed at Professor Oak. Like they don't want to know what Professor Oak is trying to teach me.
Right. You're gaining your Pokemon skills. Meanwhile, they're like, how does this help with my taxes?
Yeah, exactly.
So on the note of, your Scribblenauts study, or just trying to for these games to be more like additive to teaching, we're in no way advocating for games to replace like classes. It's always advocating for classes to be improved in any way they can and be more like relatable to the students. And all the students are playing video games, like no matter what form, mobile, console, VR, whatever, board game, they're all playing games. And just bringing games into the classroom in a way that enhances the learning, like, always is fun and helps. So one last way I wanted to bring up with this was user generated content type games, like Little Big Planet. games where you can like hook up game modes yourself. I think Project Spark was something that Microsoft was trying to launch, and they used Conker as like the mascot for it. But that was another like, hey, here's a game where you can hook up game logic and make like characters and give them like AI behavior. Here you can like sculpt levels with these level sculpting tools that like are kind of simplified versions of an artist's 3D modeling tool, and even like extending outside of Project Spark, like Minecraft, right? We've seen videos where like people make full on calculators, computers. Some of them even get Counter-Strike running in Minecraft somehow.
Wait, you're saying that people will build a computer in Minecraft and then they will create the software to play Counter-Strike on it within Minecraft?
No, so I don't know the technical back end of this, but I will say what I do know. So people will use redstone, which is some sort of like electrical conductor in the game. They'll use redstone and a bunch of different pistons and doodads to build out computers. Yes, full on computers. And at first it started as just calculators, and you could like input buttons like 2 + 4, and and then it would do its calculations and spit out what it needs. And now at this point, I think it's people find a way to like run a virtual machine. I don't, because their computer's already running Minecraft. I think they find a way for Minecraft to run a virtual machine on their computer. On their like IRL computer. So the virtual machine is in Minecraft running off the IRL computer, and then that's how they play a different game in Minecraft. It's really just like people shit posting is like the is just so technologically advanced in some cases, and that this is one of them. But the fact that you can do that is insane, and the fact that people like learn how to do that, and that eventually helps them get into like C++ programming, or like product design in some cases, like,
Or architecture. I've heard stories about people getting into architecture from like because they got really into Minecraft and like trying to understand like how a building functions.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Minecraft, it has all those pieces that are very conducive to architecture, and they even leaned into that with like making the more decorative half blocks and stuff, and that's because, like you said, their community just really loved building things, and it allowed their community, and those kind of like architectural enthusiasts to go out and build the fantasy sites that they had always read about but maybe never seen. If they wanted to build places from real life, like the Vatican and the Gladiator Dome, like we've seen that as well. And yeah, with that comes the specking out via blueprints. Even though the scales are different, obviously real life to like Minecraft blocks, all those skills are translatable to the real job. That's not to say that someone playing Minecraft for 5 years who has like really good structures should be hired as your home architect, but we're saying if they have like an architect degree and they have a really good Minecraft portfolio as well as like an IRL portfolio, maybe give that guy a little more credit than someone who doesn't have the additional hours. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was awareness and fundraising. This is mostly, I'm talking about the like Extra Life streams, but I do see a lot that like Twitch streamers and stuff do various streams to donate to various charities. And it's never really any particular time of the year. I talk about Extra Life because this is probably the most popular one. Extra Life is an event where streamers will live stream themselves for 24 straight hours playing video games or doing whatever their stream activity is, and they'll do this in the effort or in the hopes of making money for a certain charity that they decide to donate to. So this spreads awareness for like whatever that charity serves, like ALS or cerebral palsy or like cancer research, all of that. And it, if anything, I would say, like, more so than spreading awareness to any one individual like cause, it spreads the sort of monkey see monkey do mentality. It sparks a trend, essentially, right? Like, if more people are doing these donation streams or just making donations a regular part of their entertainment, like, maybe more people will do it, which we have seen. So I don't have any statistics on the grand scheme of how that's helped, but it seems like donations are more regular now, or it seems like donations are a regular part of live streaming now, which could be seen as a benefit to all of society.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of like you mentioned ALS, and that reminded me of this is kind of more related to the um stuff that you were talking about, like with like PTSD and VR and stuff. Have you heard of Neuroscape, the company Neuroscape? It's founded by a neuroscientist named Adam Gazzaley, I think is how you pronounce it.
No, I have not heard of Neuroscape.
Okay, well, basically, you're gonna love this. This dude is he's a neuroscientist, and he basically created the first video game that requires a prescription, or that like where your doctor can write a prescription like for it, and is potentially covered by insurance. And it's used to treat ADHD. Basically, his whole shtick is that when we think about treatment for a lot of mental health disorders, people often think about like medication as the first treatment modality that one should try. And he's trying to turn that on its head and like look at other tools that we could use. He's suggested is a company around like video games and like how they can be used.
I'm reading the website right now, and it looks really cool.
It is. It's really cool. Yeah. So anyway, so like, if you like watch the intro video, I listened to a podcast with him recently. But if you watch the like intro video, he talks about on his website, which I'll link. He talks about how like people, their like peak cognitive performance, I think, is in their late 20s, and that's like includes things like multitasking, right, and working memory, which is short-term memory, which is like basically how many like digits, let's say, can you keep in your mind at like a given moment, you know. So the idea behind his company is that there are different conditions that he's trying to treat. So there are things that are like more physical in nature, like Parkinson's and MS. And people are using video games as a like kind of like augmented reality video games, I think, or at least where your body is the controller. It reminded me of Connect, and that kind of like moving with intention is helping people who have physical disorders. But then there's also like the ADHD and like kind of like attention, like what we would call attention regulation, right? So how can I stay focused and those kinds of things? And having a fully immersive video game apparently is a way to, you know, it's obviously, you know, he is pouring a lot of this neuroscience research into it. So it's not just like any video game, right? It's like very intentionally sculpted to cater to the like attention deficit struggles. But this is real, you know, he's a pioneer in both mental health and also like video gaming. You know, the idea of you like using these tools, it's similar to what we were saying about Assassin's Creed, you know, like the idea that like you can use video games were created for fun and for enjoyment, and like we're finding all of these other uses for them that are benefiting you know, like architects, or, you know, like you were saying, like archival data, you know?
Right, it's benefiting like historians, it's benefiting vets, it's benefiting educators, it's benefiting our medical professionals, our military folk, and it's like spreading messages to people, you know. Hopefully the majority of them are positive, you know, like the extra life and the awareness for causes. But yeah,
so I went to this conference right before COVID hit. I think it was like February. It's called NAMI, NAMI, which stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness. And one of the reasons I went was because there was this panel that talked about, or not a panel, it was a person, but who talked about she worked for a company called Mightier, which is based in Boston, and it's similar to what I was just talking about with this like neuroscience research, but basically it was looking at like helping children with emotional regulation through video games. And the way that they did this was something called biofeedback. Are you familiar with biofeedback in video games? Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, well, kinda. Like you're talking about when you get the like finger pulse sensor on a user, right? In a video game, something like that. Or are you talking about when they use PSIs to like pluck you every time you get shot?
I'm not sure if that would be considered biofeedback. I'd have here. Let me just jump into this specifically. So biofeedback is like when they incorporate your own, like something like it could be your heart rate, or it could be like it could be like your like brain waves or something like that, right? So it's looking at biometrics as a way to in a way that changes the video game, right? So this company, Mightier, based in Boston, specifically, they gave you basically like an iPad that was like linked with this like heart monitor, and there were a bunch of games, and they were like really similar. Like one was like super similar to like Fruit Ninja, and what they're doing is so you'd play Fruit Ninja, right? And then as you like performed worse on the game, your heart rate escalates, right? Because you're like freaking out that you're not doing well at the game, right? That's just like a natural response. The game like gets like foggy, so you're not able to see it as well. It's correlated with your heart rate, right? So as your heart rate increases, it becomes harder to play the game, which is frustrating, right? And you don't want that to happen. So then the game is essentially teaching you to monitor your own heart rate, to recognize when you're feeling elevated, and then in the game they give you like techniques. So it'll say something like, take a deep breath, and like they have like little like characters in the game who like kind of like emerge and like kind of like break the fourth wall and are like, well, this is what you need to do to keep yourself under control. And the idea is that this is teaching emotional regulation to children really young who are already going to try to play these video games, and they have like screen time, and like so their studies are like, you only play this amount of hours per week, blah 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 blah, right? And it's like it's done in a way that's like really structured, and you can like use this for like classrooms for children who have sped needs, who like are maybe struggling with some emotional regulation greater than the average child. And it's just really like an amazing tool that can be, again, can be used. And it's not really relying on the same neuroscience research that the Neuroscape company is, but it's doing something really similar in that it's like creating this relationship between you and your body, and it's using the game as a vehicle for you to learn about it. Did you get that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Have you heard of anything like that before?
Can't say I have off the top of my head.
I love these alternative uses for video games. It really gets me so excited that it's becoming integrated in other avenues, and that like people are like employing them for so many different, like we've touched on so many different things just like over the course, and like this is like us just like going back and forth, and like like we have different like experiences with these things, and I don't know, it just gets me fucking jazzed, dude.
Yeah, I agree. Like and again, it's with things becoming more mainstream, right? And that's what makes me more and more excited for VR to reach critical mass and become more of a mainstream household staple, right? Not the dystopian picture of like everyone with a headset on not talking to each other. Like we're already there with our phones. I'm excited more so for the prospect of that tool being available to so many households to help out in whatever way possible for society, right? Like teaching's already been improved in ways by VR. I'm not sure if we specifically called any out, but we could see VR potentially helping, especially during a time like now. Sorry to date this episode, but there is a pandemic going on. VR could potentially help in that context to allow the teachers and the students to somewhat physically be around each other. It's definitely a weird problem to solve, but as we have more of these headsets available, I'm looking forward to seeing like what cool and unique takes we see, like the ones we have been talking about this episode.
Yeah, I really like that idea about like VR being used for like classroom stuff, like for remote learning, because right now it's just like put on your webcam and so that the teacher can watch you, but like you could be on YouTube and like have the classroom muted or something, like it who knows what you're doing. There's no there's no supervision. I have a friend who's a teacher right now, and he's like talking about how they really don't even have a way to enforce people having their cameras on or not having their cameras on. Like, the administration is not allowing them to come down on that, even though it's encouraged that you have your camera on. And like, even if you do have your camera on, that doesn't necessarily mean you're paying attention. I just cannot imagine like what people would be doing with their camera off. I mean, just watching TV all day, like it just seems like just engagement in the classroom is probably like at its like biggest, low right now. And I could totally imagine that like VR would be a way that you really couldn't get out of having to pay attention despite not being in the physically present in the classroom.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thought. I mean that's the initial hope, right? But I was just thinking, given what you said, like, would the faculty come down on people who don't put the headset on? Would they demand that a PC version be made, but then you would be at the same problem, right? Like, if you can't get everyone in VR to do that. Something that came up in some of my conversations about video game, like pre-game lobbies in VR, is that right now players don't have a way to what do I want to say? Players don't have a way to interject with other players. So let's take the classroom example, right? Timmy has the ability to walk around, so he walks around all over the classroom during class, which is very disruptive. There is not necessarily any code built in for the teacher to like grab Timmy and like stop him from moving. So maybe from a design standpoint, you have to like account for that and put in.
Can the teacher be like a DM? Like, can like
exactly
you request permission or like an admin or something like that in order so that she has more power than the students?
Absolutely, yeah. Like I was just going to get into, developers can create these toggles for them within these experiences, right? Because really, you're designing something. Most designers who are really good designers design things for other people. They very rarely design anything for themselves. They best understand their user and give them what that user needs. So if our user is going to be a teacher, for designers, it would seem obvious that they need some sort of moderation tools. So like some sort of button that puts Timmy back in his desk. Maybe it locks him at his desk and just keeps. And I mean, like, if Timmy wants to turn around and look at the wall, that is his freedom. He can do that. But he is locked at the desk and he could be muted, whatever. But these are all tools, and like you said, these are tools for the DM. And like you said, you could get permission to like enter the classroom. But that really all comes down to like how enforced would that teaching style be, and like how much participation do they need from the student, or how much presence do they need from the student?
Yeah, for sure. I also just want to say to our listeners that this was a very maybe not, I don't think chaotic is quite the right word, but we kind of went in a lot of different directions with this episode. And I'm sure that there is still like an infinite amount of material to cover. So if you want to write into the show with questions on anything or comments, or just if you want to dialogue with us about anything that we talked about, this is like, obviously we're not, like, I'm not a professional psychologist, even though we talked about some psychology stuff today. So please take everything with a grain of salt. This is really just meant to be like the start of a conversation. And you could totally write into us. I'd love to read about anybody's thoughts, and we could potentially read them on the show, Los, if you think that's cool.
Oh yeah, I would love to read thoughts from the listeners, questions if you got them, maybe even your own change of heart through some of our deeper dives, Like, definitely share that with us via emailing us, like Ryan had said.
Yeah, askdeepinthedepad@gmail.com.
So, speaking of the change of heart, this is a segment where we discuss whether or not we changed our minds on any notions we had before going into this episode. Ryan, would you like to kick us off with the change of heart?
Sure. Okay, I think that the Assassin's Creed stuff really gave me a lot to chew on. I haven't really thought about the word. I worked in a library for like a couple years, and I was thinking about how there's like this system where everybody, like, they try to have redundancy. So let's say you and I are two different libraries. I'll keep the physical journal and you'll keep a digital copy of the journal, that kind of thing, in order to, I mean, for most journals, more than one library in the country will have them, but even for like really niche stuff, they try to have at least, one digital, one physical copy, or something like that. And the idea that like video games can be used for like architectural purposes, I just hadn't really considered it from the record keeping and archival stuff. So that's something that I think I need to like spend a little bit more time with, and like keep thinking about. I kind of want to push myself to find other ways besides just architecture, that there's like a sort of like record keeping. But I don't know, maybe like, we started talking about Guitar Hero at the like earlier today, and like maybe as like kind of like music of a certain era, it's not like there's Beatles Rock Band, right, is like a collection of Beatles songs, and there's no shortage of like Beatles content, but is there like, what is the relationship between games and preservation and those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's a really I would love to hear your thoughts on it down the road as you dwell on it more, because it's an interesting topic. I honestly haven't thought about it all too much. Like, I've thought about it probably in a shallow sense, but I haven't actually like gone deep into the deep hat on that one.
Oh yeah. So what's your change of heart? What has changed in your perspective overall? Or
I feel like the educational aspect might have maybe specifically on like the literacy side. Like, okay, I would say the Scribblenauts story kind of shook my faith in kids like learning how to maybe like read from games in a sense. Like, okay, so having a game that teaches someone how to read as opposed to having a game that encourages someone or like helps someone to read, you know what I mean? Like using the game more as an additive. Like, again, this is it is like probably like not a full change of heart, but just like for now, I think just games should probably try to be an additive to the educational experience rather than maybe trying to be the full educational experience.
Dude, I know exactly what you mean. Like when I first got my hands on the Scribblenauts study, I was like so excited because I was like, oh man, this got published. They must have found that it like drastically improved literacy, and it was like a half an hour in and I'm still like vibing and like really feeling my oats and whatnot, and then like I finally get to the discussion section. He's like, so this wasn't great, it did not improve literacy in a really drastic way, and I was like, damn, like, and it does have that like positive note of like, well, teamwork and collaboration and all of these things can be strengthened, and but I almost feel like that's kind of like grasping at straws a little bit, and it's like, of course people are going to be more engaged and more creative when they're playing a video game. Like how could we not expect that? And I think the finding that I was really, really hoping for was that like vocabulary would shine through.
Same.
But honestly, I've played Scribblenauts before and I don't feel like I'm really stretching beyond. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll use another fire extinguisher. Like I'm so whack. Like I like lose all my words when I'm like trying to play Scribblenauts. I'm like, how many ways can I say bucket of water?
It's almost that game show effect, right? Like where you just freeze up on Family Feud, like you get asked this super simple thing like, what do you put a belt on? And you're just like, but I laugh when you mentioned the like, I wrote fire extinguisher for the 5th time because like I did the same thing. It like and I was like relating the study to like my own experience, and I'm like, yeah, what the hell? I only ever like I only the most creative thing I did was just shown on the commercial, which is just so not creative, right? And the creative thing shown through the promo material was like getting God and giving him a shotgun and having him fight Cthulhu, and it was like, oh, you can do anything, but yeah, you can only do anything that basically your mind is the limit to a large extent. And then if you have a large enough vocabulary, you're probably not playing Scribblenauts, right? Like,
you know, I will say in the defense of Scribblenauts, one of the later games, they added the ability to combine adjectives with nouns, which I thought that was so impressive. I didn't play it, but when I read about it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like instead of writing eyeball, I can write furry eyeball. Like, yeah. Genius. And it'll work, you know, like it can combine things that you wouldn't expect. And I think that can really stretch imagination, because it's not just like about situational, like how quick can you be on the situation, and like how many different ways can you like reach the highest ledge, you know, ladder, jetpack, blah, 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 elevator, you know? But it's like, how can you make that elevator special? Or like, you know, like it's not just like ramp, it could be like ginormous ramp, you know? And like that's really like pushing you to like just stretch beyond the boundaries of what is real, or like what could be, right? You know what I'm what I'm getting at?
Just broadening your horizons in a way, right? Like so in the sense of like, hey, use adjectives and try, and you know, you get bored of the adjectives you already know doing it over and over again, and I think a game makes it all the more apparent to you that like, oh, I'm using the same thing over and over and I'm getting bored of it. So it's testing you to like impress yourself by getting out of that box you create, the easy to reach, like only 2 synapses fire. It's asking you to fire like 3 or 4, make that extra stretch.
Yeah, it's like Mad Libs, like it's the same kind of effect where it's like, I don't just want quickly, like I need better adverbs, like come on Ryan, you know, like
right. Yeah, and you know, big props honestly to the teams that put together Scribblenauts, because like you said, one, that the whole dictionary to creation system was cool, very cool to begin with, but to add in the adjectives took so much more like design work and engineering, and obviously the framework was there, so like that made things a little easier, but it's still a big undertaking, and it's cool that that's now there. Speaking on the archival aspect from earlier in the episode, it's cool that that's there for us to like know that that's a point in gaming and tech history. Like if we ever want to attempt something remotely like that, we now have like a box that can be at least examined for reference, which is something that I noted as a big thing, because like one of the pros and like risks to VR is that like there aren't that many boxes. Everything is still so new, like not really a template has been made for a lot of things. So whatever is there and is kind of groundbreaking needs to be archived or studied ASAP. And with that, I think our descent into the D-pad is over. Oh boy, Ryan, I feel the bungee cords we're strapped to getting tight. I think they're about to snap back. Oh no, we're getting pulled out of here. Listener, please join us next time as we explore all things video games through an intellectual lens.
Thank you for listening to Deep in the D-pad. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share us with your friends.
For updates and discussion, follow us on Reddit at r/deepinthedpad, Facebook at deepdpad, and subscribe to Deep in the D-pad on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the bell.
And if you want to ask us questions or you had a chance to share your own D-pad delight on the show, email us at askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com. Be sure to put question or delight in the subject line.
Big thanks to 8-Bit Jazz and Kevin MacLeod for supplying the music for the show.